So to recap, audio and game development. We have all sorts of departments in a game company that I talked about. The audio department tends to be more isolated, right? We have all the various roles. I didn't cover all of them, but I gave you kind of a general swath of different roles from directors to interns, okay? And if you're working in a small company, you're going to be doing all those things. The tools of the trade, we talked about some hardware and software options, okay? The software being a bit more in detail here about audio editors, music and loop production, which included sequencers, the various types of effects plugins, samples and virtual instruments, all right? Sound effects libraries, save time and money, right? Scripting tools and audio engines are a big component that we use in software. And then I was going to talk about the Soundscape. On a quick note, I apologize about hearing if the email in there. I realize you probably hear that. I will make sure that's not in there at the next lecture. I just want to keep rolling here. I don't want to stop. So hopefully I won't have too many more of those, if any. So real quick, we went over this in the last lab, our first lab on Wednesday, right? We talked about how game audio provides three basic functions: feedback, immersion, and entertainment. Very important, okay? Any sort of feedback to the player. Am I winning, losing? I picked up something. Do I get a reward for that? There's a creature behind the wall. It's growling, should I go in there? That's feedback to the player. Immersion, anything that helps suspend our disbelief, right? And brings us into that world, that gaming experience, and makes us feel like we're part of it. Okay, that's a really powerful component. And adding entertainment is fun too. Having that what I called ear candy before, right? There's this stuff that's fun to listen to, fun to hear, interesting. If you're playing a medieval fantasy game with some spell casting sound, has this really swirly effect to it. You just like to cast the spell because of the sound, right? It's just so cool. Entertainment value is a big part of it as well. All right. And I said it in the very first lecture, we talked about how sound, game audio can provide a unique experience to each player. We're taking a real-time experience, and as audio designers, we're trying to craft an experience in real time that's going to play out in all different ways. We know we're going to have so many of sound A and sound B and music clip 1 and dialogue numbers, 22 through 28 in this one scene, whatever it is. And it's all playing out in real time. It's always going to be a unique experience. And again, we want to help sell that and suspend your disbelief. Okay. That's what we call a soundscape. And we want it to be transparent and not distract them from the game itself, like breaking that proverbial fourth wall, right? It's usually when something goes wrong and not when something sounds great. And that's okay with us. I talked about the components on Wednesday of music, sound, and dialogue. All right. The history, how we had humble beginnings and low resources, simple tones. There wasn't much we could do. But as we saw through the evolution of audio in game development, we began to see better hardware capabilities that allowed us to have more complex waveforms, okay? What we called also frequency modulation or FM synthesis. It's just a very complex waveforms that sound kind of sort of like instruments. It's just basically tones that are different from each other. That's not the same thing. Okay. Eventually, getting into the late 80s and beyond, we saw the introduction of sampled audio, which includes wave files. That's a Microsoft format of an uncompressed audio file, wave file, and MIDI sequencing, musical instrument digital interface, right? We talked about compressed audio. We could have more stuff on a disc back in the 90s, for example, then we could uncompressed wave files. We can finally squash them down and have them play back efficiently. And the MP3 format was the first one to kind of most popular one to do that. We saw the rise of complete soundtracks, large sound and dialogue asset lists, right? Things are getting more complicated. The use of linear and interactive (adaptive audio), which could be anything from in-game audio stuff to cinematics and cutscenes, right? And novel interfaces like the Wiimote, or like in Wii U, the tablet had its own speaker where you can hear sound in different ways. One category, the first category of music, it can be applied everywhere. We know it can be. We know where it is. We just want to formalize it here. It could be in any sort of cinematic or cutscenes, menu screens, all right, anywhere in your world It's kind of ambient or environmentally based music. It could be character based, like a theme of somebody. We have victory or defeat music, right, for leveling up or for battles and challenges. Sound tends to be the broadest scope of assets. All right, the total experience that we have in a game tends to be mostly sound effects for most games, and that could be a very simple or complex palette. Meaning, I could have something that's just abstract tones, or I could have something that's really, very realistic sounding. And again, a lot of the same places: it's cinematics and cutscenes, any sort of environmental or ambient sounds. Objects need sounds. Character actions need sounds, which could also include Foley, that synchronization of sounds to human or non-human events. And then I have bolded here user interface. That's kind of a special category on its own because they tend to need to cut through the rest of the mix. And the only way you can really do that is to have a kind of a specialized frequency balance or EQ setup on there. And it tends to be sounds that are on the higher frequency spectrum or mid-range spectrum. If they're kind of mushy, lower frequency tones, and you have a lot of stuff going on in your mix, you'll either have to pull everything else down in volume to let that through, or more likely you're just going to change the sound and make something that will kind of pierce through that mix you have of all these different things going on. That could be heads-up display, lights, bars, pop-ups, any kind of indicator sound you can imagine. Dialogue is a fun topic, a fun category to talk about. You have lots and lots of characters sometimes in games. A really interesting process if you're going to be on the development side of that, how that all plays out in terms of recording it and mixing and so forth. Sometimes you have a central narrator who often has lots of lines in the game as well. And then again, in cinematics and cutscenes, characters are going to be in there. They're going to need dialogue. We have dialogue as sound effects. Jumping down a little bit, that's where we have, it's a sound effect. It's categorized as a sound effect, but it might be just like, ooh, ah, or like a vocalization that isn't really a word, or sometimes it is, like legendary strike or something, and it's just a quick burst. And sometimes we catalog those as sound effects. So that's why I have it here. We will need to localize, if we want to have dialogue in different languages, we need to do what's called localization, get it to the local language that it needs to be in. And you're going to have a wide variety of actors and actresses, hopefully at your disposal if you work on dialogue in a game sometime. Oftentimes you'll have 3 or 4 or more characters played by the same person. Or in the case of some games, like I think it was like Elder Scrolls Oblivion and I guess even Skyrim, it might be like 100 characters played by the same person because there's just thousands of different scenarios that pan out. It's just you could never have the budget to record one voice per character. It tends to be the most outsourced because you're dealing with outside talent, people that specialize in dialogue, and they're not really necessarily working on the team in the building or something that you're in. And with game genres, again, briefly, there's an ever-growing list that always changes. Some games have more than one, right? Shooters, role-playing games, adventure games. This is not even scratching the surface. Music games, strategy games, sports, puzzle, casual, and I listed a few of games here just for fun, what those might be. I just want you to think about genres because it's super important. The question is that I want to present to you, what do game genres have to do with audio? And the answer is everything, because the consumer is going to have an expectation of what the sound palette will be like. And I say sound, I mean music, sound, and dialogue here. They're going to have an expectation, okay, for the genre. So if it's a racing game, they're going to want to hear, like really punchy, really fast action music. They're going to want to hear, exciting, thrilling sounds of the car revving up that you're in. And so there's that expectation. Casual games, people may want to feel like they need to relax. And so they want to have a very kind of, light, calming experience or something like that. Or maybe it's thrilling, but it's in a very casual, fun, family-friendly way or something like that. There's lots of ways you could describe it. But if you think about a genre, maybe also try to keep in mind the sonic palette that the Soundscape has. It's tailored to that particular genre, so it has everything to do with it. All right. We did an exercise about imagining a soundscape, so feel free to, like, find your favorite game or find a game you don't know about really in the exercise I gave you, and turn the volume down and imagine what the sounds that the audio soundscape might be like. Here I chose Little Big Planet 3 and The Simpsons in case you missed it, and you can go through in the slides that I've posted, the actual PowerPoint slides, and play the Little Big Planet 3 movie without sound and then with sound, and play The Simpsons without sound and with sound. And there's a mental exercise, okay, to figure out how many channels could be playing simultaneously, what are the types of sounds that are playing, music and sound effects and dialogue, and why are they effective? Is it, hopefully you're doing this with a game that has good audio, and you can see kind of just by transcribing it, by listening to it, what the different parts are and why are they so effective. Maybe how did they come to the conclusions that they did? We don't know, not being part of the design team for a game, but you can almost imagine the decisions that must have been made to make that soundscape as effective as it is. All right. And then I did a recap here, and that was it. So we did our first lab assignment. Hopefully that you are finished by now, or you're on your way to being finished, and that you enjoyed the experience. And there's nothing stopping you from, after you do your assignment, just check out some of the other games I listed there and listen to those soundscapes. One of the things you should do as an audio designer is try to absorb as many of these games, soundscapes as possible. You're going to come across some really bad ones too. Unfortunately, there are more mediocre ones out there than anything else. You'll always be a few kind of bad ones, like how could they ship this thing out the door with the glitches in the sound and the bugs and this and that. Oftentimes it's not just the sound, but it's the technical delivery of that. They didn't really finish implementing it properly, and that kind of messes things up. You really need a nice balance between aesthetics and the technical implementation. That's going to give you that perfect soundscape experience. So that's all I have to say here. That was like a long 76-minute lecture, but I hope you enjoyed it, and I will talk to you next time with analog and digital audio basics. Take care.